So this happened to me when I was in my early 20s. I had just started working the late shift at a local convenience store. I was really enjoying the new job so far, but I can't say the same for that particular time of year, where it would often get dark shortly after 5 p.m. And that's the only reason you would catch me alone at a bus stop after dark. And the fact that I hadn't seen any buses pass by for a while did make me feel a little anxious about getting to work on time. The last thing I wanted was to arrive late for work in the first week, and I was still eager to make a good impression with the boss. So much so that I was getting in the habit of arriving early. But not that day. For whatever reason, the bus was almost 30 minutes late, and the beginning of my shift was fast approaching. My parents always told me to commute directly to work and avoid the local cemetery, especially after dark, but I guess I was more worried about being late for work than I was about any of the city ghost stories that had been circulating the town. I know it was a bit of a risk, but since the convenience store was only about 5 stops away, I decided to walk to the next bus stop to try to make up for lost time, and to be honest, it just felt good to be on the move. Eventually, after about 10 minutes of walking, I had already arrived at the next bus stop, which turned out to be a lot closer than I thought. There weren't any other houses or buildings nearby, and it seemed like an odd place to put a bus stop, seeing how remote it was. I waited there for a while, but it didn't take long before the cold really started setting in, and when I checked my phone to see the time, I realized I was in a dead zone and I didn't have a single bar. With no reception or any way to let my boss know that I would probably be running late, I decided it would be better to just keep walking and take my chances with the next bus stop. It really didn't feel like things could get any worse at that point, and I couldn't tell you exactly how much longer I had been walking after that. But I was getting increasingly more worried about how the road seemed a lot more remote than usual. But I was pleased to finally observe some lights up ahead. At first glance, I thought it was the next bus stop, but as I got closer, I realized that the lights were coming from a white van. But what really struck me as odd was the fact that the unmarked van was parked in the middle of the road, with one of the front doors left wide open. And as I got even closer, I could hear that the engine was still running. I got a really bad feeling and seriously considered heading back at that point, but seeing how far I had already walked, and the fact that the next bus stop might just be around the corner, I felt obliged to keep going. Though I did approach the van with some degree of caution, the fumes coming from behind it caused me to hurry along, and before I knew it, I was alongside the front of the van where I realized something that really caught me off guard. The driver's seat was empty, and I struggled to fathom what might have forced someone to abandon their vehicle like that, especially at night. And what made it even stranger was realizing exactly where the van had stopped. As if I wasn't already creeped out enough, standing before the large gate to the cemetery gave me the chills for sure, albeit not without a hint of morbid curiosity. But I figured it was high time to adopt some common sense and just continue on to the next bus stop, as planned. Although I did have some reservations about leaving the van parked in the middle of the road like that. I wasn't quite sure what to do, but my concerns became somewhat trivial as I heard something truly terrifying fill the air around me. It didn't take me long to realize that the girl's scream came from beyond the walls of the cemetery, and without hesitation I rushed to the gate and slipped through the narrow opening, which revealed a derelict display of tombstones scattered as far as the eye could see. Certainly not the kind of place you'd expect to find any children. Trying my best to be quick on my feet, but also not to be so loud that I wouldn't hear another scream or any other sound that might help me locate the girl sooner, I followed the path deeper into the cemetery, before reaching a large clearing that was occupied by an old mausoleum. I was already pretty far from the road, so the streetlights struggled to illuminate anything beyond the clearing, so I just remained still for a while, hoping to hear anything above the sound of the howling wind that might point me in the right direction. After a moment of brief silence, I began hearing what sounded like a shovel digging into the dirt. I realized at that point that I was probably dealing with more than just a little girl who somehow got lost in the cemetery, and my suspicions quickly led to the likelihood of something far more sinister, and whoever was driving the suspicious white van was involved. Nevertheless, I had to see for myself. I needed to know the truth about what was really going on. So I followed the sound that eventually led me to the far side of the mausoleum, and what I witnessed next was something that I will never be able to truly unsee. I thought I was going to throw up after all the running. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just my imagination, and that what I saw were just the shadows of the trees playing tricks. But it wasn't long before I heard the loud creak of the cemetery gate closing behind me. I can't tell you where I found the courage to glance back in the direction of the cemetery, but when I did, it only made what I had experienced even more real and equally more terrifying, as I observed the same girl now standing at the gate, but this time she was not alone. I'll never forget the sense of dread that I felt at that moment, or the sinister stare she made before disappearing back into the cemetery. Needless to say, getting to work on time didn't seem like much of a priority anymore, and I definitely felt safer returning home than I did heading for work, especially after the ordeal of that night. But heading back the same way I came only presented me with yet another mystery that I simply cannot explain. I thought about telling my parents about what happened, but I didn't want them to freak out about me being at the cemetery by myself. I did hear something about an abandoned white van on the news at some point, and that it belonged to a criminal wanted in connection with a series of kidnappings, most of which were children. The police did call for anyone with information to come forward, but just the thought of telling anyone about what I saw would always bring me back to that night. Unsurprisingly, the police never did find the owner of the white van, and despite my suspicions, I don't think I'll ever have the courage to go back to that cemetery to know for sure.